From the front row, my parents looked so proud. My father's suit was pressed, my mother's pearls caught the light, and beside them, my twin sister Laya was fixing her graduation cap. They were smiling, the kind of smile people wear when they believe the story is already written. But that morning, under the soft echo of the auditorium lights, I knew something they didn't. I knew the truth was about to be spoken aloud. The dean would step up to the podium, and before my sister's name was ever called, mine would be, not because I was their favorite, but because I had done what they believed I couldn't. My name is Nora Bennett, 22. I'm the older twin, 4 minutes older to be exact, but in my parents' world, those 4 minutes never mattered. They had always seen me as the strong one, the girl who figured things out. And maybe that's why, when I needed help the most, my mother looked at me across the kitchen table and said, gently but firmly, "Laya deserved it. You didn't not shouted, not cruel, just matter of fact," like she was reading a truth that had always existed. That sentence didn't just hurt, it rearranged the shape of my heart, because from that day, I stopped asking for anything and started building everything myself. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't dream of proving them wrong. I simply kept walking, quietly, with the kind of faith that comes from pain, the faith that one day, effort would speak louder than favoritism. And now, here I was, sitting beneath the same lights that had once felt unreachable. They thought they were here to watch both daughters graduate. They didn't know the dean's first announcement was about a student who had achieved excellence without a single cent of family support. They didn't know that student was me. And what I felt in that moment wasn't anger. It was calm. Because truth, when finally spoken, doesn't need to shout. It simply shines. If you've ever carried yourself through storms no one saw, if you've ever learned that peace is louder than revenge, take a second to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because sometimes justice isn't a fight, it's a quiet reveal. From the outside, we looked like a family worth envying. A white fence, a green lawn, red flowers by the mailbox, Christmas cards with matching sweaters. But in every photo there was a story hidden in plain sight. My mother's hand always rested on Laya's shoulder, never on mine. It was such a small thing, but small things build a lifetime. 4 minutes apart, raised under the same roof, yet somehow living in 2 different homes. She was the flower everyone watered. I was the weed that learned to bloom without it. That's where my story begins. I used to believe families were supposed to feel safe, like the scent of pancakes on Sunday mornings or the hum of the washing machine when you came home from school. Ours looked that way from the outside, but behind the photographs and the polite smiles, there were small, invisible fractures, the kind that don't break you all at once, but quietly shape who you become. My earliest memory of that difference began with blood, not much, just a scrape. I was 6, climbing the oak tree in our backyard. The bark smelled like summer and dust. One wrong step, one snap, and I hit the ground hard. My knee split open. The sting made the world blur. I limped into the kitchen, crying, leaving tiny dots of red on the tile. My mother turned from the sink, saw me, and frowned more at the mess than the pain. "Oh, Nora," she said, handing me a paper towel. "Go clean yourself up." Her tone wasn't cruel, it was distant, like I was a neighbor's child, not her own. 2 weeks later, Laya sniffled once, just a little cold. My mother heard her from across the house. Within seconds, she came running with a blanket, orange juice, and a trembling kind of panic. She sat by Laya's side, pressing her hand to her forehead, whispering, "Oh, my poor baby." I stood by the doorway, my own knee still scabbed and aching, and wondered how a single sniffle could earn so much tenderness when I had bled for mine. That was the day I learned pain has a hierarchy, and mine was always at the bottom. It continued in quiet, ordinary ways. When report cards came home, mine was a lineup of A's with one lonely B. My father would tap the page, sighing. "You can do better than this, Nora. You're smarter than that." Then he'd turn to Laya, who had B's and a C, and say, "Good job, sweetheart. We're proud of how hard you try." It wasn't envy I felt, it was disappearance, like I was standing in the same room, breathing the same air, yet somehow unseen. Our rooms mirrored that truth. Laya's walls were painted soft yellow, her bedspread pink with lace, a bookshelf built by my father just for her. My room stayed blue with cartoon cars from when I was 3. When I asked for a new comforter, my mother smiled thinly. "Yours is still fine." We don't waste money, but when Laya said her old one didn't match the curtains, Mom took her shopping that same afternoon. So I painted my own walls with the gray I could afford from mowing lawns. When my father walked in, his first words were, "You got paint on the carpet. Not nice job, not looks good, just the stain." I used to think strength was something to be proud of, but in our house, strength was a reason to be forgotten. They called me independent, but it wasn't a compliment. It was a permission slip to ignore me. And so, little by little, I stopped asking. For help, for new things, for love. I became quiet, efficient, self-reliant, the kind of child parents say they're proud of, but never really see. Looking back now, I don't hate them for it. They were ordinary people, doing what they thought was fair. They just didn't realize that fairness isn't sameness. It's noticing when one child is cold while the other is already wrapped in warmth. And maybe that's why, on the day of my graduation, when the truth finally reached them, I didn't feel triumph. I just felt balance, the scales quietly evening out after years of tilt. That was my childhood, a garden with one flower carefully tended and one weed learning to find the rain on its own. And though it hurt, that's where my roots learned what justice really means. By the time Laya and I turned 17, we were standing on the same doorstep, staring toward 2 very different futures. We both dreamed of college, of a world beyond the white fence and red flowers, beyond the quiet hierarchy of our childhood. For once, I thought maybe this would be our chance to start fresh. I studied late into the night, the light from my desk lamp the only one still glowing in the house. Laya was fast asleep long before midnight, yet somehow, when morning came, our parents always said, "She looks so tired." She's been working so hard, I learned early that people see what they want to see. When acceptance letters started arriving, the mailbox became a battleground of emotions. Laya applied to one school, the local state university, 40 minutes from home. I applied to 10, all with strong business programs, all out of state. I wanted to go somewhere far enough that distance could dull the noise of favoritism. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 2 envelopes arrived, one thick, one thin. We opened them at the kitchen table. Laya squealed first, "I got in!" Her joy filled the room. Mom hugged her, Dad clapped. I smiled too, quietly holding my own letter. I had been accepted to the same school, plus 6 others. For one brief second, it felt like equality. Mom even hugged me and said, "My girls, both in college." And I almost believed it. That night, the illusion shattered. I was walking down the hallway, the lights dim, the sound of rain against the windows soft and rhythmic. My parents' bedroom door was slightly ajar. I wasn't eavesdropping. Not really. I was just passing by. But when I heard my name, I froze. My father's voice was low, careful. "The tuition for 2 is going to be a lot." Then my mother answered, calm, practical, certain. "We'll pay for Laya's in full. It's what we always planned." There was a pause, a silence so heavy it seemed to thicken the air. "And Nora?" my father asked. Another pause. Then her voice, quiet but sharp as glass. "Nora's clever. She'll figure something out. She has that job. She always saves." He sighed, a sound halfway between agreement and guilt. "You're right," he said. "She's independent. She'll be fine," those words. "She'll be fine." They weren't comfort. They were dismissal. They weren't saying I could handle it. They were saying I was on my own. I stood there, fingers pressed against the wooden door frame, the rain still tapping softly on the glass. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, and those whispers echo for years. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. The walls were still gray from the paint I'd done myself, the carpet still stained where my father had scolded me. The house was quiet, but in that silence, I heard a promise forming. Not a loud one, but a steady one, born from exhaustion and truth. I looked at my reflection in the dark window and whispered, "I'll never ask them for help again." It wasn't anger. It was a decision, like closing a door gently, knowing you'll never open it again. I didn't hate them, I just understood them now. They didn't mean to hurt me. They simply believed strength didn't need love, but I knew better. Even strong hearts break when they're left unseen. A few days later, we sat around the dining table for the college talk. My father cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. "Girls, we want to be fair," he began. Mom nodded, smiling at Laya. "We've decided to pay for your tuition, sweetheart. You've earned it." Laya clapped her hands, her face bright with gratitude. Then Mom turned to me. Her smile softened, almost pitying. "And Nora, we're so proud of how responsible you are. You've saved so much. We think it's important you invest in your own education to truly value it." She said it like a gift, like a lesson. But what she didn't realize was that I had already learned that lesson far too early. Every scraped knee, every forgotten birthday, every silent comparison had taught me the cost of being responsible. I looked at her, at my father's downcast eyes, and at my sister's unknowing smile. Then I said simply, "Okay." Mom blinked. "Okay?" "Yes," I said. "You're right. I'll pay for it myself." Relief washed over her face as if she'd been spared from guilt. "Oh, I knew you'd understand," she said, her voice light again. I stood up. "I do," I answered softly. "I understand perfectly." That night, I took my small savings from the bank, money earned from waitressing and tutoring. It was enough for one semester, maybe less, but it felt like freedom. For the first time, the future wasn't shared. It was mine. It wasn't lined with comfort, but with honesty. And sometimes, honesty is the first step toward peace. When I left for college that fall, Laya had a new laptop and a dorm filled with fairy lights. I carried a single suitcase and a second-hand computer with a missing key. My parents hugged her tightly, kissed her forehead, promised to visit soon. When they hugged me, it was quick, like finishing a duty. I smiled anyway. I didn't need more. Because somewhere deep down, I knew what they didn't. The same soil that grows flowers also grows weeds, and sometimes the weed survives longer. The day I moved into my first apartment, the air smelled like rain and dust. It wasn't much, one small room with peeling paint, a mattress on the floor, and a window that faced a brick wall. Still, I stood there and whispered to myself, "It's mine." No one had helped me get there. No one had paid the deposit or carried the boxes. But for the first time, I didn't feel like a shadow in someone else's home. I felt real. Laya's dorm looked like a magazine spread. Mom and Dad spent the whole weekend decorating. String lights, new sheets, photos of family vacations. They left her with hugs and care packages full of snacks. When they stopped by my place on their way back, Mom stood at the doorway, wrinkling her nose. "Oh, Nora, this place is humble," she said. "It's temporary," I answered, smiling. "I'll make it work." She nodded, distracted. "Just don't overwork yourself. College should be fun." Then she handed me a $20 bill, as if that was enough to bridge the gap between our lives. I learned quickly that survival has its own rhythm. I worked mornings at the campus library, evenings at a bar downtown. Between shifts, I studied in corners that smelled like coffee and paper. Sleep became something I borrowed instead of owned. I learned the value of $1 ramen, the patience it takes to wash clothes in the sink, and the kind of silence that comes when the fridge hums louder than your heartbeat. Sometimes I saw Laya on campus, radiant, surrounded by friends. She'd wave from across the quad, her laughter carrying in the wind. When we talked, she'd complain about exams, sorority meetings, or professors who were too strict. I'd nod and smile, hiding my sore feet and the blisters from 12-hour shifts. She once said, "You always look tired, Nora. You should sleep more." I wanted to tell her that sleep costs money when time is how you pay your rent, but I didn't, because she wouldn't understand, not out of cruelty, but because she had never had to. By my second year, exhaustion became normal. There was no room for self-pity, just motion. I was proud of my grades, proud of the fact that no one could say I hadn't earned them. Still, there were nights when I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if love was supposed to feel this far away. The faucet dripped beside the bed, drip, drip, drip. A quiet reminder that even small leaks can drown you slowly. When tuition went up again, I fell short. $500 the first time, then $1,000. Each semester became a gamble, how much sleep or blood I could trade for another chance to stay enrolled. One evening in winter, I sold my old textbooks to make the payment. Snow clung to the windows, my hands were cracked from cold and dish soap. I counted the bills twice, still short. My heart pounded in that small room, and for the first time in years, I felt the ache of a truth I'd tried to bury. Maybe even strong people need someone, just once. I picked up my phone. It had been months since I'd called home. My mother's voice came through cheerful, like sunshine on glass. "Nora!" "What a surprise! How's school?" "Laya just got invited to a networking trip to Miami." I closed my eyes. Miami. "Mom," I said quietly, I need help." Her tone changed instantly. The lightness vanished. "What kind of help?" "It's tuition," I whispered. "I'm short $1,500. I lost some hours at work and—" She sighed, long and tired. "Nora, you have 2 jobs. Where does your money go? You need to learn to budget." "I have," I said. "I don't go out. I don't buy anything I don't need. I just can't cover it." Another pause, then her voice softened, but not the kind of softness that comforts, the kind that ends the conversation. "Money's tight, sweetheart. You know we're already paying for Laya's tuition. She's our responsibility." Something inside me sank, not like falling, but like settling. "Am I not?" I asked. There was silence. Then calmly, she said the same words that had marked my life before. "Laya deserved it." "You didn't. It wasn't cruel. It was just the truth she believed in." And in that moment, I stopped expecting her to ever see it differently. After she hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. The room was cold. The air smelled like cheap soap and rain. I didn't cry. Tears belong to people who still have hope. Instead, I breathed, once, twice, and reached for my laptop. There had to be a way. I found an emergency loan program through the university. The interest rate was brutal, but I signed the papers anyway. It wasn't about pride anymore. It was about survival. That night I realized something quiet but powerful. They could withhold their love, but not my determination. They could keep their money, but not my future. I wasn't strong because they abandoned me. I was strong because I refused to stay broken. I paid the tuition just before midnight. The confirmation email blinked on my screen like a small, tired miracle. Outside, snow kept falling, each flake landing softly, like forgiveness. Not for them, but for myself. Because sometimes justice isn't about winning, it's about surviving with grace. After that night, something in me settled. I stopped waiting for love to come from old directions. Instead, I poured it into what I could control, my work. The days blurred into a pattern of exhaustion and quiet victories. Library in the morning, classes all day, bar shifts until 2 a.m. Then, a few hours of sleep before it all began again. I lived on caffeine and silence, but at least I was moving forward, one paper, one paycheck, one heartbeat at a time. One afternoon, in my 3rd year, I fell asleep at a library desk. It wasn't planned. I had meant to review my notes for an accounting exam, but fatigue isn't something you can argue with. It simply arrives and claims you. I woke to a quiet voice saying my name. Miss Bennett. I looked up, disoriented, to see Professor Michael Adler standing beside me, holding my midterm paper. His expression wasn't stern, it was concerned. "You've been in my 8 a.m. class all semester," he said softly, "and the 3 p.m. seminar. You're also cleaning classrooms in the mornings, aren't you?" I froze. I hadn't told anyone that. He smiled slightly. "I see you here before sunrise. You don't think people notice, but they do." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. All I could manage was, "I'm fine, sir. Just tired." He nodded. "You're the best student I've had in 10 years, Nora. But even brilliance needs rest." I lowered my eyes, embarrassed. "I can't afford rest." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I need a research assistant for a paper on forensic accounting. 10 hours a week. It doesn't pay much, but it's steady, and it's in your field." I looked at him, unsure. "Why me?" He smiled faintly. "Because I'd rather see you build something lasting than burn out before graduation." That job changed everything. For the first time, I worked with numbers that told stories of truth, honesty, and accountability. In a strange way, it felt poetic. I was learning to uncover hidden lies on paper, even as I was still healing from the ones written into my own life. Professor Adler became the first person who saw my strength as something worth protecting, not exploiting. He never pitied me. He respected me. And through that quiet respect, I began to breathe again. He later told me about the Alexander Ford National Scholarship, a full scholarship for students who had faced significant financial hardship without family support. "You should apply," he said, sliding the form across his desk. "I've never nominated anyone before, but you fit the description." At first, I hesitated. Writing the essay felt like reopening old wounds, but sometimes healing begins with honesty. So I wrote, not with anger, but with clarity. I wrote about scraped knees and paper towels, about repainted bicycles and late-night shifts, about the phone call where love turned into arithmetic. I ended with one line. "I learned to survive without support, but I would like to learn how to thrive." Weeks passed. Then one morning, I opened my email and saw the subject line, Alexander Ford Foundation Decision. My heart pounded as I clicked. "Dear Miss Bennett," it read, "Congratulations. You have been selected as one of 5 national recipients full tuition, living stipend, all outstanding loans, forgiven." The screen blurred through my tears, not from sadness, from release. Years of holding my breath finally exhaled. I whispered to the empty room, "I did it." That night I slept for the first time in years, deeply, peacefully, as if the universe itself had said, "Enough struggle. You've earned your rest." It wasn't victory over my family. It was victory over doubt. And in that quiet triumph, justice finally felt less like revenge and more like peace. The day of graduation arrived bathed in sunlight. From the stage, I could see them, my parents in the front row, smiling proudly, unaware that the truth was about to echo through the room. When the dean spoke my name first, his voice carried the words that had once defined my pain. Achieved excellence without any family support. The applause was thunderous, but I only heard silence, the kind of silence that feels like peace. My mother's hands froze mid-clap. My father's smile faltered. For the first time, they saw me not as the strong one, but as a person who had carried everything alone. I didn't look away. I didn't gloat. I just breathed. The air finally felt light. Justice didn't come through revenge. It came through truth spoken calmly, in the open. After the ceremony, I mailed them the scholarship letter. No note, no anger, just the facts. Let them read it when they're ready. Because forgiveness doesn't always need words. Sometimes it just needs distance. That night, I stood on the balcony of my small New York apartment. The city lights stretched out like a million quiet witnesses. I thought about my mother's old line, "You didn't deserve it." And for the first time, I smiled. Maybe she was right. I didn't deserve pity. I deserved peace. If you believe that silence can be strength, that justice can be kind. Tap like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Because sometimes the softest victories are the ones that heal us all.